chair's too comfortable. Might just go to sleep.
Dr. Zhang, I'd like to ask you about the Open Blockchain Foundation that you started. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? What are the goals of the foundation and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit more briefly about myself. I'm still a full-time professor at Stanford University in Department of Physics. Also 4 years ago, I started DHVC, which is a venture fund which has made a lot of investment in the crypto area. And as I see, so basically, I like to connect the academic world and with all the innovations out of the academia and finding real applications. And especially thinking the blockchain world. The whole blockchain community benefited so much, for example, from the innovation from Diffie and Hellman. And I think new cryptographic primitives will be invented and discovered, and they will have real business application in the blockchain world. So the mission of the Open Blockchain Foundation is exactly to build this bridge between the crypto and blockchain community together with the academic community, which is furthering this research. When you look at government funding, actually there's very limited government funding in this area, surprisingly, but I think philanthropic organizations should pick this up. So we're very grateful that NEO Foundation did the initial support for the foundation, but I was just talking to you and your colleagues, looks like there's a lot of very successful ICO projects, and quite a number of them like to pledge some of their funds raised to philanthropic organizations, which exactly has the mission to connect the academic research in new cryptographic primitives and principles together with the blockchain world. Actually, I have a slogan for the future of the crypto economy: in math we trust. So we need a lot of good math in order to make a lot of trust to happen.
Thank you very much. So for many startups right now, data privacy on the blockchain is a big issue, and they don't know how to store the data. Can you tell us a little bit about the secure data storage on blockchain? What are the problems and solution to those problems?
I can't figure out whether that's too broad a question or too narrow a question. I mean, the attempt with blockchains is to arrange distributed data storage in a way that is secure and auditable by everybody involved. And there have been a variety of problems. There will continue to be a variety of problems. The ones that immediately come to mind are issues of scaling and issues of decentralization via proof of work that turn out to be unnecessarily expensive relative to the results you're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you very much. The idea of the data to be auditable by everybody is great, and right now there are different attempts to apply homomorphic encryption as well to this. And what do you think about that? Currently, there are, as I understand, there are big computational challenges to implement this.
Well, there are big computational challenges to homomorphic encryption, and it probably is a question of whether the things that you want to do are amenable to homomorphic solutions. It will be extremely surprising if general-purpose homomorphic encryption is ever developed that's inexpensive enough to make it feasible to, rent all of your computing from Amazon Web Services and encrypt and decrypt everything. But there are particular operations that do work well that way, and that's so. One of many things in engineering, it's important to choose judiciously what tools you use with respect to the objectives you have.
Yeah, so for example, there's a development in something called somewhat homomorphic encryption, which will be so not the general purpose full homomorphic encryption, which will be very, very expensive and inefficient, mostly only in academic research. But depending on the real business use and the real data analysis that needs to be performed, a technology called somewhat homomorphic encryption may apply.
I mean, I'm a big fan of a demonstration that was given by Drew Dean when he worked for DARPA. And he was setting out to, his overall objective of his project was to improve the speed of homomorphic encryption. But and I think this is charming because he stumbled on something that he could do very well and didn't realize that it was a classic ComSec problem. And it's called the problem of a black bridge. If you have a secure teleconference, right? Well, the simple way to do it, so to speak, is that everyone has a secure, that is encrypted telephone, and there's some central place, and you all call into the central place, and it has access to the plain text, and it mixes the voices and redistributes them. And that's, that's just great for the US DoD. It owns lots of property, it has fortresses, it can have a secure place for the bridge. But if you're a startup with 5 people, one in Hong Kong, one in Chicago, one in Buenos Aires, right, then you really don't have that sort of facility. And he gave a demonstration with several people on iPhone 5s, and the bridge was in Amazon Web Services. But it all used homomorphic encryption in such a way that the bridge could mix the voices, but couldn't understand the voices. That's a perfect example. That just happens to work because of the operations that work efficiently in homomorphic encryption. On the other hand, if we're a bunch of terrorists and we're trying to develop an H-bomb, doing all of our calculation on Amazon Web Services, it probably isn't going to work. We're going to spend more time with homomorphic encryption than we are going to, simulate reflections and things of that kind.
Thank you very much. So the next question is regarding quantum computing. Basically, a lot of people say right now that when quantum computing progresses and there are quantum computers that can basically break blockchain and the whole PKI as it exists right now. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I'm directly involved with development of quantum computer. Actually, just a week ago, a talk at Google. I gave a talk at Google, the titled Quantum Computing, AI, and Blockchain, the 3 pillars of information technology. Quantum computers is still developing very slowly. And the reason is that the quantum bit, the qubit, is very easy to decohere due to the environmental noise. So the current approach to quantum computing, for one useful qubit, logic qubit that you use to perform useful computation, roughly you have to have 10 to 100 error-correcting qubit to correct its error. So that's simply not scalable. But in that talk, I pioneered a new approach called topological quantum computing, which can do error correction by itself. But that's still relatively new. So upshot is that we don't really know how long it will take for quantum computer. I would say quite safely, not within next 10 years, a useful quantum computer that can crack the code of the blockchain. But overall, I think this whole ecosystem will develop like the sword and the shield, and they will co-develop. And even if quantum computers are invented, there are certain quantum-resistant algorithms that we can use. So even though the quantum computer hasn't been realized yet, there are already a lot of development, especially in academia, about quantum-resistant algorithms. And the whole field, I think when you look at human history, a lot of great technology are developed because of warfare. I think a lot of the encryption technology, such as Alan Turing's effort to breaking the Enigma during the Second World War, was due to this kind of effort. So I think to have this kind of competition always enhances the whole ecosystem. So I think it's a very interesting development to watch.
Yeah, so if quantum computing comes along the way the physicists keep promising us, some of them promise it more energetically than you have, I think it will have a profound, I understand its implications. I'm very interested in what you think. Will have profound implications for science, technology, biology in particular. There'll be all sorts of things we can't compute now that we will become able to compute, right? So wasting our quantum computers on attacking people's blockchains may or may not be the critical application. But the key point about projects going on at NIST and other places now to develop quantum-resistant cryptographic algorithms, and just incidentally, not all cryptographic processes are equally subject to quantum computing. So if you have, advanced encryption standard computing, nobody knows any way that quantum will speed that up by taking it down to, will affect that more than by taking it down to an equivalent key length around 160 bits or so. So that's still going to be quite secure. It's Diffie-Hellman and elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman and RSA. Those will suffer a great deal. So you need to do something else, and people are working on several something elses. The point that interests me is all of them, known at the moment, are distinctly more expensive than the current ones, right? And that has implications for the architecture of the system. So right now, an example I like to give has to do with 2 generations of secure telephones. So something was called in the US the 2nd generation secure telephone. The way you got a key, I got a key to talk to you, was to call an intermediary, the key distribution center, and it would manufacture a key for the 2 of us, and we'd get it and we'd be able to talk. But that was an expensive process. It took a long distance call. And so then we'd store that key for the next 24 hours. We got to the 3rd generation secure phone system. We used the current type of public key systems, and then they could manufacture keys so cheaply that it's manufactured one between themselves for each call. Right? But if things get more expensive, I have this imagine a future in which you call Amazon, and once a year, first call of the year, you spend a minute talking to them, developing keys that you now use for the rest of the year. And I think that wouldn't be very attractive, but that is, to my mind, a very distinct danger of the impact of quantum computing on our secure systems.
So connecting some of your questions, one mission the Open Blockchain Foundation can be involved with is to try to find quantum-resistant algorithms.
Thank you. So coming back to securing the data in decentralized fashion. So solutions like IPFS and storing encrypted data on the blockchain, being that storage immutable and you can't rotate the keys, how secure is to store this data? And are there solutions to eliminate rotation keys?
I have to admit, I'm not sure I followed the question. Try again.
Okay, so so basically, if you have a master key and you encrypt the data, and you can basically just decrypt the data and change the master key, on immutable data storage, you cannot re-encrypt the data. So once you encrypted that, it's essentially forever there.
Okay, so that's sort of true already of many kinds of data that you operate with in encrypted communication systems. That is, say, once you've encrypted it with one key and transmitted it, you don't gain more security by encrypting it with another key and transmitting it again. You would just give the opponent a choice of 2 problems to work on, and they might both be intractable, but then again, you might have bad luck, and one of them might be more tractable. So I think you're talking about a question like that if in fact you bind yourself using the blockchain to particular keys, then you can't change them. But on the other hand, it very frequently doesn't do you any good to change keys for the same data anyway.
Okay, thank you. Another question would be about consensuses currently on the blockchain. So we have proof of work, we have proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, we have different hybrids between them. So what do you think about the consensus mechanisms that exist today and the blockchains that implement them? Can you comment?
Yeah, I think there's a graded scale. On the one side, you have proof of work, which is truly decentralized, and then but then it suffers a little bit from performance. And on the other side, you have things like DPoS, which are a little bit more centralized, higher performance. And right now, unfortunately, we're not getting outside of this dimension. We hear a lot of proposals, but I don't think anyone is offering both high performance and true decentralization. So this is another area we really needs a lot of research on. So I think right now we're stuck with some kind of a compromise.
Yeah, well, that's a typical phenomenon in engineering.
Yeah.
It may, I mean, often you have a compromise like this, and then you can make real progress.
Yeah, yeah.
The way, I mean, you can look at, sorting algorithms, a very good example.
Yeah.
That certain sorts are just plain better than others. They don't have same trade-offs. But that doesn't never any guarantee until you make such a breakthrough that that's true. And so I think, that's very much the type of issue. When I said I'm working with crypto labs and we're interested in applied cryptographic problems, applied really to business problems, that's typical of the kind of things that would concern us. But we can never guarantee that we're going to come out with a system that falls outside of that triangle Professor has described.
Yeah, I think, right now, but right now there's a lot of focus and fascination on developing different kind of public chains with different consensus protocol. I think the effort is a little bit too overspent. I think it's simply a business choice, what kind of combination of decentralization and performance you want. But what the blockchain community so badly needs is a real killer app that really has extensive use, has challenges on performance, but also a requirement on decentralization. And as those really big killer apps arise on blockchain, the system will naturally choose the optimal point.
Mm-hmm.
What are your predictions for the blockchain development? How do you see blockchain evolving in a year, 2 or 5? Is it even feasible to look that far in the future, given how blockchain quickly develops these days?
Well, in some sense, we're already in year 5 or 7, right? I mean, if you look with respect to Bitcoin, given all this tremendous enthusiasm there is about blockchain, it will certainly be disappointing if we don't get some good results in the next several years. But, I think it's Yogi Berra said it's always hard to predict, particularly about the future.
So I see some major trend. I think private and individual ownership of data is the biggest killer app on blockchain. Today, in the old world, we rely on natural resources. We dig them out and we mine them. But today, the most important and valuable piece of resources is data. And right now, the system is not, both the data are owned in the centralized platforms, but they're also siloed. So the blockchain can actually bring to kind of level the playing field and giving the data ownership back to the individual. And once we own our own data, so one area I'm very fascinated about is the entire biomedical data. It should be individually owned, and then it can really be processed more efficiently in the blockchain ecosystem to enable privacy-preserving data marketplace.
Yeah. So this is a question that has always been the issue in security systems and cryptographic systems in particular, is how you couple the technicalities of these systems to the social phenomena you're trying to support. And it has often turned out that people have competing views of what social phenomena they want to support. Right? So that a very obvious thing we worked on a lot with cryptography, and certifying authorities are an example of this, is that we want to support the sort of credential systems that existed in the world that were the foundation of governmental and corporate authority structures. And then people look to the side and say, well, wait a moment, we can take, in some sense, the keys as the entities. We cannot have any of these existing authority structures. We can build a peer-to-peer entity by doing that. So I think we're going to see a lot of variation of understanding of what you do because people have new insights into what they want to achieve by it.
You mentioned biometrical data. Do you think it's going to go hand in hand with blockchain, and how is that going to be used on blockchain?
Yeah. So right now, so so we have read the human genome quite a number of years ago. Initially, there's such big excitement, but the book of human genome, we got a book, but it's very hard to read. And the only way to read it is finding the correlation between the genotype and the phenotype. And for that, we need a massive amounts of data from the individuals with privacy-preserving computation. And only then we can really, if there's the right incentive structure in this data marketplace, research can really make connections between the phenotype and the genotype. And that will enable precision and personalized medicine to a scale that's unimaginable before.
We were hoping that your quantum computing would help us to...
For drug discovery.
Yeah, I specifically asked because also there are companies that look into eliminate the need to store private keys and basically to use just users' biometrical data, which there were some unsuccessful applications before where the cars would be opened with the fingerprint and then the thieves would cut people's fingers, and that was not great. So do you think something like this coming, or we will always have to use digital keys?
Yeah, I think a combination of some digital and biometric may be the best way to go.
Yeah, biometrics are in some sense antithetical to the basic notion of crypto protection, because the important thing about cryptography is that in communication cryptography in particular, is that you can, if the keys are compromised, that may have an effect on the past, but you can adopt new keys and go forward. If you're depending on something that's derived from biometric property, then one difficulty is you can't change that. Right? The other difficulty, if we take a slightly long look forward through the rest of the century, is it seems very likely that some things that aren't just, protein-based are going to come to the fore, that re-engineered protein-based creatures will come to the fore, and so biometrics may not have the same stickiness to the characteristic that you're trying to represent.
So how are we doing on time? Can we take a couple questions from the audience?
So what, if anything, should large companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon be doing to support or investigate or build towards the blockchain ecosystem?
I thought those companies are all supporting quantum computing with which they can attack it, right?
Yeah, I think right now, I think the blockchain as a computing platform is still not efficient. I still see a lot of computation being done on the centralized cloud, but the settlement and the marketplace and the incentive structure being carried out at blockchain. So in that sense, it's quite synergistic.
And I think another point to be asked, if you're looking at the who should be, who is needed to support blockchain research, you have to ask whether there are parts of it that are sufficiently expensive that it requires the sort of resources that Amazon and Google have. And that's clear, for example, about quantum computing. That requires real resources, but whether, developing new mathematics, coding new systems, and so forth, requires resources beyond the range of startups and small companies is not perfectly clear to me.
So throughout the last couple of days, we've talked a little bit about the role of hardware in data privacy. For example, earlier, Professor Don Song talking about these sort of secure, siloed pieces of hardware with trusted computation environments. And so I'm curious to hear your two perspectives on the role that that may play moving forward, you know, in tandem to some of the cryptographic methods that are being developed.
So you're talking about things like physically unclonable functions?
Like SGX, Intel SGX.
Oh.
A secure enclave.
Yeah, okay. No, that clearly has a role. Exactly what is needed to get it right, I think, is not perfectly clear.
Yeah, I think right now there are a lot of cryptographic primitives that can do secure and privacy-preserving computation, such as secure multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption, but some of them are not so efficient. So I think in the near future, we're going to see some kind of a hybrid between software-based and totally trustless software-based system versus some centralized hardware-based system, such as TEE. So the trust execution environment based on Intel SGX. But I think the marketplace, seeing the market demand, there will be a lot of hardware vendors competing. And eventually, we do hope some kind of open source hardware standard will be proposed and implemented.
Yeah, there are there's sort of two issues in using hardware. One is that you can get much higher computational efficiency if you specialize the hardware to, for example, SHA-2.
Yeah.
Right? But the other is the issue of isolation, of enclaves, as you were saying, isolation of cryptographic computations. And you can either do that on a specific basis, or, and I think this is a reasonable frontier of investigation, is to build a tool that allows people implementing a variety of cryptographic phenomena to do it inside a general purpose engine that gives you the virtues of this sort of isolation. And I think, you know, evidence seems to me that that particular thing is a bit trickier than.
But overall, I see a tremendous market. And that's, if I will make one prediction about the future, I think it's all about privacy-preserving computation, enabled by blockchain and incentivized by the blockchain.
Final question right here.
Hello. With the world moving to decentralization and consumer owning the data and being able to transact peer-to-peer mesh networking, blockchain underlying all this, how much room do you see for companies that are market makers or intermediary like Uber, Airbnb, Facebook?
They should change as soon as possible.
And since that was brief, we'll take one more question.
Just a follow-up question. He asked, how about the big companies? And then I asked, how about those countries and other centralized institutions like central banks and Wall Street?
Like Wall Street?
Yeah. Will they just totally getting disrupted?
Can you repeat the question?
Banks like Century Bank and Wall Street.
Yeah. Well, my same comment applies. They should change as soon as possible. Adopt, adapt, or die.
Yeah, people looking for the killer app and they end up with a dead app.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen.